Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Dan Borsche, coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people. Coming up, traditional owners in the top end step up their fight against a major housing development in Darwin. Will Australian banks follow the UK and compensate the victims of online scammers? And the art show selling the works of big-name artists at rock-bottom prices. Joining me on the panel tonight, education lecturer at Western Sydney University and former Greens candidate Rachael Jacobs. Great to have you along.
Thanks for having me.
Spokesperson for the Australian for Unity campaign, director of the Indigenous Forum at the Centre for Independent Studies, Liberal Party member and former ALP President Warren Mundine. That is an intro.
That's an intro and an all-round good-looking bloke.
Your words, Director of Essential Media Communications who works on campaigns for the Labor Party, Peter Lewis. Good to have you along.
Hey, Dan.
And in Adelaide, strategic advisor to the Uluru Dialogue and former public servant Kirstie Parker. Welcome.
Thank you.
And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag The Drum, and we're on Facebook as well. Well, support for the yes vote in the referendum to enshrine an Indigenous voice to Parliament has been slipping for weeks, particularly in Queensland and Western Australia. The latest Guardian Essential poll found 47% of respondents in favour of the constitutional change, 43% opposed, and 10% who said they were unsure. Opposition to the voice was strongest in Queensland, where half of respondents opposed the proposal. But leading advocate and one of the architects of the voice, Noel Pearson, says the Yes campaign can be turned around.
We're not going to fail. This is too important for Australians to fail on this vote. My sense from talking with ordinary Australians on the streets, in the suburbs, about the importance of this election, the fact that we have 3 months to have more conversations and to come to a decision, we've got a lot of ground in front of us.
The Yes campaign appears stuck in the middle of two flanks of no campaigners. Those who think the proposal for the voice goes too far and those who think it doesn't go far enough.
Let's not pretend that a blank canvas was put in front of us. The voice to Parliament is born out of white appeasement, not black ambition. No peoples have risen out of centuries of oppressive subjugation through simple, unambitious and unthreatening piecemeal proposals. So please, stop telling us that the voice is the answer when it's designed to dance around the problem.
Kirstie, Ben Abadangelo there saying that the voice is born out of white appeasement, not black ambition. What do you say to that?
I say it is a gesture from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who've thought deeply about these things and who believe that Australians can receive the invitation of the Uluru Statement from the heart. And I think they can come to understand that it is modest but mighty. So people say this is only an advisory body. It can't compel the government to make a decision either way. And that's been one of the myths that has been put out in the campaign so far. But it's such a powerful thing for governments to listen carefully and thoughtfully to First Nations peoples before they make decisions about them. That is actually very powerful. And I appreciate that there is a variety of opinions within the First Nations community, but we know that the key to this is bringing all Australians with us, and that includes governments.
Warren, how do you respond to those comments from Ben, particularly that part about born out of white appeasement rather than black ambition?
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far, but the voice actually is it's come from a group of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders. It is not all Aboriginal people in Torres Strait Islands agree with it. I find when I travel around the country, it's you know, something like 40% of people you're looking at who really haven't heard about the voice, or they in this Aboriginal communities, or they have heard about it but they don't understand what it's about, and those numbers push up into this about 70%, and we saw that with the Crikey poll. Now Crikey's not our friend, but it did have that poll that said it was quite large about numbers in that. So look, we're 4 months out from this, from the election. If we believe that the rumours going around it would be the 14th of October, that's a long time, and a lot of things can happen in a long time. They say like a week in politics is a long time.
Sometimes a day's a long time in politics.
If someone said to me, said, "What are you going to be like at the end of the campaign?" I said, "I'd be very, very ragged and sleeping." But to me, there's people still don't understand what it's about. To me, I'm very clear about the voice in regard to, I talk about my family and where my family come from. You know, we lived under the Aboriginal Protection Act and the Aboriginal Welfare Act and that, and in my first part of my life, and we went on this journey, and it's an amazing journey that we're going through. And we had so much success in a number of different areas. You know, 55% of the land mass of Australia is now under Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander control. You've got, you know, businesses, you know, the Indigenous business strategy is now an $8.7 billion economy, and you've got 45,000 jobs that have been created out of that. 37% of them, you know, in regional and remote Australia. That doesn't mean that we, you know, there isn't problems. You know, there is a lot of problems that we've got to focus on, but treating us as all one, you know, homogenous group. When talking about issues and problems, we need to focus on those communities, need to work with those communities and listen to those voices on the ground.
I want to stick with...
Can I just add something
yes,
there?
yeah, of course, Kirstie.
Just, I feel compelled to push back on the statistic that Warren is offering there. The Uluru Dialogue has had research done and surveyed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. These were randomly selected, and we found that 83% of First Nations people support the voice. He does raise an important point, and that is that not everyone has all of the information yet that they need to be very certain about things. But we have been going around Queensland and New South Wales and in other jurisdictions, and we're talking to both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and non-Indigenous Australians, and we are inevitably finding that when they receive the information, when they know what is being proposed and how it will actually help, the myriad of problems, some of which Warren has glossed over, but we saw them in the Productivity Commission's reporting against the Closing the Gap framework yesterday. When they see that the voice will help, they inevitably support it. Yeah. And I have to say, there are some bright sparks. You know, it's fantastic that Aboriginal businesses are having some successes and so on, but on the other side of the ledger, we have terrible statistics that we know that all Australians will be concerned to fix.
There was one point that you both touched on, and that's around the time frame and the information. And yeah. if we are right on the speculation, probably 4 months out. Noel Pearson this morning was talking about it's really that last 6 weeks where people tend to switch on, and that's a long election-style campaign in this country. Warren, there was also a shift in tone, I think, this morning from Noel Pearson in that interview, saying politics is politics. We've put that behind us now about some of the language that people have been critical of him about. Mr Pearson also saying that in spite of a raft of polls that we've just heard indicating support's waning in his state of Queensland, that he's seeing the prospects of winning Queensland, quote, on the rise. I wonder how you respond to that.
Well, yeah, look, you started 80% about August last year when it was announced about the voice of Parliament, and then it's dropped right down. Now, look, there's polls all over the place. You know, some polls are saying the voice's support is 52% and a little bit higher than that, and in other polls they're down to about 43 to 47%. So I take it that you can't take every poll as the fair income stuff, all right? You've got to take it with a grain of salt. And so, but what all the polls agree on is that the yes vote has gone down, and no one cannot deny that. And so when you get, from my experience in political campaigns and that, is that once you're getting in such a big fall, it's very hard to turn that around and move it back again. And that's just, that's data from any election around the country. We're feeling very confident at the moment, not popping champagne bottles or anything yet, because, as I said, it's 4 months. Anything can happen in 4 months.
Well, this is a fascinating conversation about polling. So, Peter, I'm glad that you're here, because your company, Essential, has put out a poll over the weekend that had support for the voice strengthening and month-on-month strengthening. So it was showing somewhat of a trend there, I think, as well. Most other polling has support falling. How do you read that?
Our poll, with undecideds in there, it's in play, right? So first thing, polls shouldn't be scoreboards. They're thermometers of where the community is at any one moment. The community is pretty confused at the moment, and I think we started 6 months ago, as you're saying, with general goodwill to move forward as a nation and accept the invitation that was embedded in the statement from the heart. And the No campaign has been very effective in instilling that momentum. I reckon there's three things that have been going on. The first is the way the media covers it has granted the No campaign what I'd call false equivalence. So Kirstie is on. So Kirstie's on the panel representing the 250 signatories of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Warren's on the panel representing Warren. No sledge on you, Warren. You've been incredibly energetic, but the idea of a balanced debate, most Australians who are concerned want to be reassured that it has the support of the majority of First Nations people. And every time a panel like this occurs, with due respect, it raises the doubt that not everyone's on side.
Well, on that, then what's the alternative? Because if we were doing a panel like this and we didn't have a range of perspectives,
you'd be in trouble.
We'd rightly be criticised.
Absolutely. So this is really difficult.
This is about giving everyone voice.
So this is about putting the context into it. So a lot of people are coming into this as if this has come out of thin air or come from Canberra. It came out of the process that Kirstie, Megan, Dean, Noel were involved in, a generation of Indigenous leaders. I'm not speaking for them, I'm just observing from the outside that they've anchored it. We know that when people spend the 4 minutes it takes to read the statement from the heart, they're really open to be convinced on the details. That brings me to my second problem with this campaign, the detail furphy that has been flooded in. You know, the old idea, fill the field with muck. So from the day that Peter Dutton started putting out his demand for detail, it's conflated what should be an enabling piece of constitutional change with the detail to come from the legislature into this total, let's play a national game of design the perfect piece of legislation, which it was never meant to be. And the final thing, and this is where I will have a bit of a sledge at Warren, I think there's two different campaigns being run. I wrote a piece this week. I reckon you guys are playing political baseball. You're having a swing every day. You're making it loud. You're making it nasty. You're putting Thomas Mayo in cartoons and then expecting everyone to get angry. The other side is trying to build a consensus, a bit like Usman Khawaja methodically putting together an innings. So what's going to play out over the next period is two very different campaigns. As The Guardian Australia revealed today, the No campaign's being run by American political consultants who are very good at running the division games. You've got a loud divisive game on one side, and then you've got the Yes campaign trying to create this community consensus. They've got 200 NGOs, they've got the union movement, sporting organisations, business, churches. It's whether those civil society organisations have the wit and the wherewithal to build their networks and counteract what is a very effective but very divisive campaign being run by No.
Warren, I reckon.
Mate, it's all about a swipe.
I'm going to call it that you're going to want a response to that.
Well, I find it interesting. You said I just represent Warren, and then all of a sudden you put me in this camp of all these American pollsters and all these groups of people. If anyone knows me, it's Warren Mundine's always got his own opinion. And
that's my point. That's my point, and good on you, but it's not the same as Kirstie, who's representative.
Look, that's really weird when you say that when you're talking about free speech, because everyone has
a right to
what you're really saying is we should sit at this table and we should say, okay, how many people are members of this and how many people are members of that?
But I think debate should have context.
And then they go there. We have a right, as every Australian citizen says, to have an opinion. And look, Kirstie and I are great mates. I love her, and she does a great work. And I'm not going to have this voice divide us, all right? And same with Dean Parkin. We worked together. We worked on the New South Wales child abuse, Indigenous child abuse.
But I'm not saying it's about you. I'm saying it's about the way our media portrays the debate as two sides of an argument. It's more complex.
Well, that's how it is. It is two sides of the argument.
Well,
and the polls are proving
the equivalence.
The polls are proving it. People have a right to ask questions and have a right to for an answer in that. And look, and it was the Prime Minister who started this off. He said, "You look at the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I want to put all that in. That's my campaign. This is the first step. I want to do all that stuff." So people have a right to ask about that. And then he said, when people ask about detail, well, he started off by saying details there in the Kalmar Langton report. Well, I did a 6-part article series in the Australian where I got 2 Aboriginal women, PhD women. They went through that.
But the referendum's
not
about Kalmar Langton.
he said it. See, this is the problem. Yous are all over the place. One person says it's a minor thing, it's only a little thing, and then the next person says, oh, it's everything. You know?
But this is
and
your
I know it's
campaign
everything.
to confuse people and create
Well,
doubt,
no, that's
which
just
has
the
been...
fact. It's
Anyway,
their
we should
word.
let
It's
Rachael...
your words.
Can I jump in?
It's your words, their words.
I
didn't say that.
I think
your mob said that.
I think you both make some really interesting points. Kirstie, I want to bring you in on this because I don't think the media is above scrutiny. You're a journalist. In fact, you were the editor of the Courier Mail. That's where we first met many, many years ago. What's your perspective on the media coverage of this and the challenge that has just been identified of how to have a debate that is not creating false equivalence?
Yeah. Well, as a journalist, and I'd probably say I'm an old school journalist, I did my training 35 years ago now, and it was important to be factual. It was also important to provide context. And, Warren has just spoken about freedom of speech, and of course everyone is entitled to their opinion. They're also entitled to ask questions, and you would hope that the information that they are provided in the answers is accurate. I've spoken to journalists and I've said, at the very least, I would expect you to interrogate the information that is being put before you. From the Uluru dialogue, we're entirely comfortable with our information being interrogated. We have not put out information there that has had to be apologised for, as is the case with the No campaign.
Well, I've
and
never
I have to say,
apologised for anything in the No campaign.
people have referred. I would point to Mr. Lingiari's grandson, who was erroneously identified as being against the Voice. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in that, but I want to say also that these things didn't start. The furphies did not start when the election of the Albanese government and a commitment to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. They started before that. For example, with the former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, who came out and said that the proposed Voice was a third chamber of parliament. He has since seen the error of his ways. We've seen other politicians apologise for that mischaracterisation. And that sort of mischaracterisation actually matters because some people put that information in the bank and that's as far as they go. So that speaks to the challenge that we have with the furphies, the spurious information that has been put out there. It certainly is a challenge. I'd have to say, if all of the things that have been said about the Voice, all of the fanciful things were actually true, I would be concerned too. But the vast majority of them are not true. So that is the challenge facing our campaign, and that's to educate Australians because we are confident that they will come to the right conclusions. And
Warren, I just want to make clear that we weren't turning your microphone off. We're trying to figure out some audio issues here. But none of the audience got to hear your response about Mr. Lingiar.
Well, this is the bizarre thing. I've never met the man before. He come to Canberra. He introduced himself as the grandson. I took that as face value, and we worked with it. So and also you've looked at our stuff, we've taken it down. So why should I have to apologise because someone, which the Yes campaign are putting out there, lied? Now I can't fact check every person I meet.
But that's the responsibility of civic engagement to be clear about your facts.
I did. I come out and we took it down.
Like yesterday, writing in the Telegraph, racial segregation will be back in the Constitution. Like, what is that?
That is because we're talking about a race. We're talking about Aboriginal people.
But the race power is already in the Constitution.
Yeah, that's for all people in the Constitution. We're actually we're
designed
going back
to
in
confuse and divide.
1967. And I was alive around
and you're
that
good
time.
at it. But
and my people were campaigning in the 1967 referendum. It was about equality and shifting away from Aboriginals being excluded from the race, and they put down the race power, which is for all races and that, right? We want a journey where we're not all treated just by a race. We're on a journey that is about lifting race out, getting rid of racism and getting all this stuff. You can't say by putting an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice into the Constitution is not putting race in the Constitution.
Instead, you end up defending status quo, which is pretty unacceptable.
I don't defend the status quo.
That's what no means.
No, it doesn't. See, this is another fallacy. When I'm talking about no, what I'm talking about is what I've and other Aboriginals have achieved. When I was a kid, you could count on one hand how many Aboriginals was in university. There are thousands of them today. We have professors of law, professors of surgery, professors of medicine. We have all these thousands of people, over 700 doctors, lawyers, and all that type of stuff. So this idea that nothing has changed and nothing has gone forward, it's just nonsense.
I'm very keen to hear more of this, but I actually want to bring Rachael. Sorry, I've left you
Well,
here
can
for a bit.
I begin with universities where I work.
Go.
So yes, but how many First Nations Vice Chancellors do we have? How many, the graduation rate is still not what it needs to be, because universities sometimes don't do a very good job at asking people to embracing culture and embracing difference, and we often try to stuff people back into a colonial box, and so this is not right. So yes, things are better, but there is so much left to do, and what we're witnessing here is the ravages of colonisation, which cannot be undone with a yes and a no box, which is not what's being asked to happen. But so many Australians are unsure because they want to get it right. They so want to get this right, Dan.
How are you seeing this debate fold out? Because I've had panel after panel on this show, including Warren with Ken last time they were here, saying about how challenging some of the debate has been, and how in some instances, not verbaling you, but how toxic some of it is as well.
Well, I've weighed in, but I have maintained, and last time I was on the show, Dan, I said I'm really interested in your views. I understand you're the host, but my role here is as a migrant living on stolen land. My role is as a listener, and to do the best I possibly can. And there is a discomfort. I work mostly in migrant and refugee communities, and there is a discomfort. I understand how the Constitution works, but a lot of people are saying, I feel uncomfortable having to vote on something that I really shouldn't be asked on. So I think a lot of the unsure is people simply wanting to get it right, and it is a hopeful conversation about people wanting to do the right things by First Nations justice.
Dan, can I just say one more thing? We've been, when we're talking to people about this, normally you think about polarisation as being filter bubbles and different bits of information with different people. When we're looking at how people are responding to the detail that is around the proposal, if people enter the conversation with that sort of attitude, wanting to learn and wanting to be reassured that this is the right path forward, the information works perfectly. It's when they come in looking for holes that they find holes. So the campaign that's kind of being run between no and, to a lesser extent, yes, trying to create the mood for change, is actually to get people ready to do that last consideration over the last 6 weeks. So I think we all agree that what happens over the last part of the journey is going to be really important. But it's going to be a test not as much of our head but also of our heart, and I think that's really important to keep a picture of.
No, I agree on that, because in any campaign, it's the last 4 weeks and the last 6 weeks that people are focusing. And this is one of my comments, that we could be well behind or in front or whatever, is because of that. Because
Remember
people
the Republic?
So people aren't focused as fully as yet.
Well, on tonight's episode of 1+1, the Elder Series, Tasmanian Palawa leader and activist Rodney Gibbons says he can't support the voice, but also doesn't support the no case. Here's a little bit of what he had to say. Have you decided how you're going to vote?
Pretty much. I certainly, under no circumstances, will vote no. I will not be party to the crap that Dutton and the National Party are coming out with currently. But I can't vote yes, because I don't think that the government of the day and the supporters of the yes vote have explained to people like me enough to convince me that is the right way to go. And I'm also beholden to the fact that I chaired the regional dialogue here in Tasmania, and that dialogue was adamant that it was treaty first, with truth-telling, then maybe a voice. So I won't vote no, but I'm not voting yes.
And you can see more of that interview on ABC TV tonight at 9:40 or anytime on ABC iView. Well, for years, a parcel of land in Darwin has been a flashpoint between government attempts to address housing needs and environmentalists concerned about the impact on an endangered species of birds. Now, traditional landowners have lodged an application to halt development, saying the cultural significance of the land hasn't been properly considered. Land clearing started last week at the Lee Point site with plans for 800 new dwellings, primarily for defence workers. Federal Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek approved a revised plan for the site last month, while acknowledging the threat to the rare Gouldian finch, with just 2,500 believed to be left in the wild. Now the minister is considering the emergency application from the local Larrakia people after 11 protesters were arrested last week while trying to stop the land clearing. And Malilme May, a Larrakia and Dungalaba woman, was one of those arrested for blockading the site and joins us now from Darwin. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
What drove this emergency application to the Federal Environment Minister?
Well, we felt we had no other option other than to try and look to our emergency applications, and it was a very distressing case of arrests and protests that forced us into a corner, and we had to stand strong. And the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Cultural Heritage Act, which is a federal piece of legislation, is what came to our rescue at the moment.
Tell me, what's the importance of this area to your people, the Larrakia people?
So for particularly my clan, the Dungalaba clan, this area is known to us as Binbara, and it's a really significant place for us. It is connected to the Old Man Rocks site, which is acknowledged by the Sacred Sites Act to be a sacred site, and this parcel of land is connected to that site.
So tell me more about your concerns about this defence housing development that we've seen reported on could see almost 800 new dwellings.
Yeah, so my family, we understand that housing is important, and for defence people, they obviously need houses when they're coming to do their stints here. But our concern is with the location and that it's on a site of cultural significance. And not only that, the site has no access by public transport. Schools and shops are over 2 kilometres away. And so Defence have said that they actually want the houses not only to be for defence but for community. But we struggle to see how this location caters to the community.
And you were arrested, I understand, as well. What happened?
It was a very chaotic day, and it reached a point in the middle of the day where I stood in front of the fence line. So I was not on the trespass lands. I was on the footpathway, which we were allowed to be standing on. And I stood there and started to do the Macarena. And I invited...
Well, that's the offence.
You just got a big reaction from the whole panel about the Macarena.
And I invited the security and the police to dance with me because I was trying to distract them from the bulldozer coming in. And in under 10 seconds, with no warning, I was grabbed by 2 security officers and then by a police officer and put in the back of a paddy wagon.
Yeah. Rachael, you're an activist, an environmental campaigner. I think activist is the term that you use yourself. That's not a judgment from me. You've been watching this closely. What's your assessment of what's at stake here?
Yeah, I have been watching from a distance. I do live in Sydney, a long way away, and that doesn't mean that has nothing to do with me. So the first thing is, from our perspective, I think we all need to get up and do the Macarena in honour of Malilme's action, because I honestly believe as a dance teacher, dance can change the world. And that's an example, though, of, I'm serious, of a non-violent action to a very violent situation. Dan, we can get into the details of, is 50 metres enough for the finches to survive, what area, but how much more? How many more endangered species need to be threatened? How much more do we need to ravage this earth before we say enough is enough? We are at a turning point in history. We are at a turning point in climate justice. We're at a point in time where the entire world is crying out for protection of the earth, and we're bulldozing on sacred land, we're bulldozing, where an endangered species is living. Where is the limit? Where does this end? I actually just can't fathom how much more we can ravage this earth before we say enough is enough. And Tanya Plibersek has admitted that this does have concerns. She does have concerns for the golden finch. So by her own admission, this is a real problem. And I can't go and vote yes for a voice if when First Nations people are using their voice, I say, no, not in that way. No, I'm not interested. Or that's not voice enough for me. That's absolutely ridiculous. I just have no idea where we finish with the ravaging and the destruction of this continent.
Kirstie, what lens are you putting across this? Because you've worn lots of different hats, from journalist right through to strategic planning and thinking that you're in now.
Well, I have to observe, and obviously I would never speak for anyone else's country, but I have to observe that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been masters of their own destiny to some extent, in that the wins or the gains that we have had have been because we have stood up to power. And of course, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are no different to other Australians, with their right to use whatever mechanisms and measures are available to them. So if they are going to use legislation to at least cause a pause in something, and I note that they would have not just cultural heritage concerns, but also concerns about the environment. We're talking here about, flora and fauna and so on that are a part of our dreaming stories and are also very important. And I would hope that authorities will always go to the nth degree to listen to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Also in Darwin, and this was a completely different realm, we had, for example, a major liquor supplier planning on building, I think, the biggest alcohol or grog shop in the Southern Hemisphere. There were community concerns, and those communities took those concerns to every point that they could and were able ultimately, given concerns within communities around alcohol abuse and availability of alcohol, etc., and there was a change in that decision. So I perfectly respect the right of the Larrakia people to use all the means possible for them to be able to have their concerns heard.
Yeah, Warren, how are you seeing this?
I find, because I've been in the construction game and been in the mining game and that, I find a lot of problems with the actual consulting of Aboriginal groups. You should be, when you're thinking about doing something, you should actually come and ask the people. You should sit there and talk to them and go through it, and then work, whatever the outcome of that is decided between that conversation. I've seen this happen time and time again in a lot of different areas, and it's sort of like I beat my head against a brick wall about it. We do need to actually respect the traditional owners, have those conversations before you start spending a lot of money about the building something, and then you can work from there. But if you don't do that, then you're wasting your time, really.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sign of the flaws in our current system. And I would note Tanya Plibersek is trying to change the laws to embed both cultural and environment consultation earlier in the process. So we all know what it's like. You get invited to a consult, you ignore it, then the plans come up and, oh my God, look what's going to happen. And so building the structures so that these concerns come to light earlier in the process. Yes, there's been mitigation that has been brought into this process. Obviously not enough for everyone, and I'm not trying to presume pass judgment on the project, but if you think about it in the context of our previous discussion, getting good engagement at the start of a process rather than at the 11th hour is just going to lead to better decisions.
I was going to. That was sorry.
Yeah, no, and you see that in native title. The law says they have this 6-month negotiation process, and we've seen governments and large corporations who just have the meetings, have the barbecues, spend it, then it goes through that 6-month process. Look, that's just nonsense. It's got to stop, and you're 100% right. It's got to be done at the beginning.
But getting people to engage in that is like extracting fingernails. Like, people don't engage until it's too late, and to try to sort of normalise those sorts of conversations at the start of the game, right?
because we're also busy, busy defending land and things like that. And I think this cuts to the core that our environmental protection laws are just inadequate. They're just, and this isn't just some lefty greenie perspective here. The Samuels Review said that these laws are designed around what can you get away with, rather than the onus being long. Why must you be destroying this land at this point in this time? What is your very, very, very strong case for doing that? It's our environmental laws that need strengthening, and because this is just one example, and this community is defending so admirably. But again, how much more should they have to defend?
Well, on that, do you think that the reforms that have been discussed with the Federal Minister, Tanya Plibersek, is that where it needs to be? Does that go far enough, not far enough? Where are you on those conversations?
I am not an expert in those laws, but I will say if you're the Federal Minister, that's a pretty good sign that you should be able to be strengthening the laws. You're in government. You're in government, for God's sakes. So you've got a really clear mandate to take some big action on the protection of the environment.
Melilma, I want to come back to you because, as you've touched on, there is that issue of a lack of housing in the top end, especially for some Indigenous people. I wonder, do you see this is often is being portrayed in a lot of ways as the solution, but it sounds like you're saying, yeah, that's an issue, but this is not the solution for it.
Yeah, it's absolutely not the solution. And as one of the panellists was saying before, you want these bodies could make better decisions that save them more money. There are other plots of land in Darwin that are already cleared, that are on public transport lines, that are right near shops, that are actually bigger land masses that they could be using. But we know that their decision to use this land is because it has coastal views and is beautiful. But we are calling on Minister Plibersek to really reconsider what's best for the community, and the community are calling out to save Lee Point.
And is there some level of development that would be acceptable here, or is it nothing at all?
From us, absolutely nothing at all. There already has been enough development. They've already encroached very closely to this really significant area. So enough has already been done, and we want this area protected.
Melilma May is from the group Uprising of the People in Darwin. Thank you so much for your company tonight. Well, this week, UK banks foreshadowed major changes to the way they deal with scams, and there are calls from consumer advocates here to follow suit. New laws coming into effect next year will force British banks to compensate the customers who've been ripped off within 5 days of the incident. Half of the money will be paid back by the bank that sends the money, and the other half that receives the money.
Introducing this protection, it then puts the incentive in the right place. It means that all payment firms involved in this system have a direct financial incentive to look after their customers, to educate them, to intervene on transactions that are suspicious. And so by injecting that incentive in, we can try and reduce the scope of this problem in the first place, which is frankly in everyone's interest.
Well, closer to home, Financial Services Minister Stephen Jones indicated that Australia might consider similar changes.
We're definitely going to lift the bar, and we're definitely going to ensure that banks are accountable for much more. When you look at what the UK does, we'll probably look at something which travels in the same direction.
But the country's 4 major banks are pushing back. Bank bosses are appearing at a series of federal Senate hearings this week where ANZ boss Shane Elliott voiced concerns about any potential change.
With due respect, a simplistic answer of just saying make the banks pay for it does not solve the problem. It just moves the problem somewhere else. And the unintended consequence potentially is people will be even less careful about falling for scams. Scammers will still make the money, and now we've just socialised the cost of that.
Last year, scam victims lost a record of more than $3 billion, an 80% hike from the previous year. The Big Four banks reimbursed less than 5% of those victims. Now, Warren, you actually got scammed and saved by the bank. What happened?
It wasn't a proper scam. Actually, the bank in this situation did the right thing. I was doing some renovation of my house and I had to transfer a bulk of money across to the builders. And I was angry at the time, but I think they'd done me a favour because when I transferred the money, they stopped it. And then they rang me up and said, is this a proper transfer of money? We had a conversation and it was sorted. So I don't know why banks can't pick up.
Was it that someone had intervened to give you the
in
wrong
the
bank details?
Yeah.
So you transferred it to someone who was scamming you?
And then, so they saw that, and it's really funny, so they saw the first stage of it and they said, wait, this is a lot of money being transferred here. And so then they intervened at that level. So lucky for me, they did at that first stage, because I could have lost a lot of money and not got my kitchen. And so I think banks have a role. They can't step back. I shouldn't say they should have a role. They're in there. They're in the centre of all this, and they need to be taking some responsibility about this and putting proper systems in place. I'm not no tech person or anything like that, but to do that, and help. And also with some of these people are old people who have been ripped off, and this is their life savings. And what are we going to do? Put them out on the street? Come on.
You know, the other thing is that it'd be hard to think of an industry that's benefited as much from technology getting rid of people. So a generation ago, banks had branches, they gave people personal service. They've found a great way to save money by automating finance, and they've made huge profits out of it. And particularly older people have had to live through that change, and they're the major victims. Not you, Warren, of course, but the older people are the primary targets of the scams. And I just find it really galling to see the CEOs of the banks on those massive bonuses saying socialise the cost. Like, their clients are being scammed on systems that they've invented so they don't have to give them a personal service anymore. I think talk about perverse consequences. The consequence of this would be banks investing more in financial literacy for their older clients because they would be bearing the cost when things go wrong.
Right. Yeah, well, Rachael, I want to bring you in on that because we have seen that incredible rise in scamming and the human cost of that is just extraordinary. Where do you think that accountability lies?
Well, firstly, I got a scam call on the way here.
Today?
So, I was actually on the way and somebody from Visa called and I don't have a Visa card. So, it was just extraordinary. And my first thought, as soon as I get a scam intervention anywhere, is about my mum, who is an older person. And I think I need to tell her and I need to warn her. Yeah, because, and I don't want my mum off internet banking. I don't want her to not engage in the digital world. I don't want anyone to have to go back to money under mattresses or anything like that, you know. So it's actually weirdly in the bank's interest that they get involved here. And we can see it does make a difference. In the UK, when they trialled this, scamming went down 17%. Yeah. It does actually make a real difference. It's just the banks aren't keen to eat into their super profits. Yeah. And by the way, that was, man from ANZ on the screen there that posted a profit of $3.8 billion in the last half year in a housing crisis. Surely there's something that they can do here.
Yeah. Hey, Kirstie, this is squarely the UK laws about putting the onus back on the banks. Is that what needs to happen here in Australia as well?
I have to say I have a lot of sympathy for it. And I pick up the point that Peter and Rachael have made, and that's about banks are in the business of making money. And of course, the heads of banks will push back on anything that will reduce the amount of money that will go into shareholders' pockets. So it's entirely understandable. And to paint it as this is a simplistic answer, it's just one part of the puzzle. You know, financial literacy, communicating to people about the risks, making them aware of it. For example, I think 1/5 of cryptocurrency exchanges are fraudulent. So, desperate people take desperate measures if they think that they can glean some financial benefit off it. So we do need to educate people, as well as banks taking as much responsibility as they can. They can be good corporate citizens, and this is one way to do it. And
also I say that they can still make their money.
Yeah, they're still going to make super profits.
That's not going to stop.
That's not to stop. $3 billion is a hell of a lot of money. And this is coming from ordinary citizens out there, people out there who are struggling.
I wonder what happens to that. So only 5% has been reimbursed.
Yeah.
So that means 95% of scam, it's the victim carrying the can, even though the bank at either end has okayed a transaction that's dodgy. That's not right.
Well, and this is where what I wanted to ask you, Peter, because you were talking about automation, but has the other side of that just not happened, which is around safeguards and building in customer protections?
Absolutely. The investment always goes into the upside and the cost is seen as the risk mitigation. Now, obviously, they don't want systems that are unsecure, and I get that the banks spend a heap on cyber security, but there is a huge incentive to go after it. Now, I think their argument is that if they know the bank's going to pay for it rather than the poor unsuspecting pensioner, then they're a bigger target. But I think it just makes it a bigger incentive to get your systems right.
Correct.
And surely
And I
that's...
don't think scammers are Robin Hood here. They're not thinking, oh, I'll be thoughtful about who I scam here or who actually pays the bill for my scamming. I think they're just going to scam.
Or
And
how
I
it's
think
done,
it's
isn't it?
great.
It's just about catching people out.
That's right. And incentivising for banks to put more investment in detection and prevention is a good thing.
So I never thought I'd say it, but good on you, British government.
Yeah, good on British government. And also the other thing is, have a relationship, and you raised it earlier, have a relationship with your customer. And that's why I was lucky, because someone saw it in the transfer and they just stopped it straight away. Now, why don't you have those relationships with your customers so you can do things?
Well, so much of that is because so many jobs have been cut, isn't it? That it's when you go to automate it, if you haven't got the system in place that offers that protection, then you don't have the relationships either. What needs to happen now?
Oh, look, there's so much more that can be done, and I think that people raising their voices is always the key, but governments can put pressure on banks as well. Governments can stand up to banks and say that you have a responsibility here, and, you know, there's laws that we can put in place to make this stuff happen.
Yeah, and in addition to that, Warren, and this is something that has been mentioned kind of across the panel, is the support for older, vulnerable people and those that aren't connected to technology and might not have the latest protections or be savvy enough around this. Not that that's a protection for anyone, but surely there's a bigger piece, as Kirstie was saying here, around education.
There's a bigger piece, and I declare my interest because I'm getting old and grumpy in my old age. It is.
I wouldn't have been able to tell.
But it's true. Look. Banks make a lot of money, but they will still. I argue the case that they can do these things, have the technology working, you know, because they do it. They work on that with money laundering and other areas. So why can't they do this in this area, and where it is a real human thing about people and old grumpy men like me? Yeah. You know, we should be. And have that education programs and work. It gets back to customer relationship. You know, you know your customer. You should know your customer, and you know who the old people's in your communities and that are, and you could work with them. You know, and also the technology can work a lot better for us as well. You know, but I'm not a computer nerd, but I'm sure there is something they can do.
Well, I want to shift gears this evening, and I wonder if you've dreamed of hanging the work of a big-name artist on your wall, but you just can't afford that big price tag as well. Well, this Saturday may be your lucky day. Postcard-sized pieces by famous Aussie artists, including Reg Mombassa, this year's Archibald Prize winner Julia Gutman, and dozens of other renowned painters are going on sale for the bargain basement price of $100 each. This is at the Incognito Art Show in Sydney. But yes, of course, there's one big catch. As Incognito co-founder David Liston told The Drum.
Anyone can buy, obviously. It's first in, best dressed. They're limited to buying 3 artworks each. All artworks are $100, but the big twist in the whole thing is you don't know who you're buying until you've bought it. So you could buy a kid's artwork, you could buy a complete amateur, first-time artist artwork, or you could buy Ken Doan or Julia Gutman, this year's Archibald finalist winner. You could buy their artwork, they all cost the same, and you won't know who you bought until you've bought it and taken it home. We generally have what I'd say is like 2 types of buyers. The real sort of, you know, for want of a better word, the art nerds that really, really love to test their sort of skill in identifying the professional artist or the specific artist that they love. and going and picking that. Now that's easier said than done with a lot of the sort of professional artists do it in a very iconic style, and it's very easy to pick that. A lot of them see this process and see the pressure, the limited pressure on this as an opportunity to do their art a bit different. So that makes it really fun for those art nerds. But the vast majority of buyers come in here because they've seen the stuff online and they'd say that artwork will look great on my wall. This artwork speaks to me. I really love it. I'm gonna buy that up. From the artist perspective, it's generally the emerging amateur getting elevated and getting discovered and progressing on their road to professional. For the professional artists, the ones that don't necessarily need to do this, they really enjoy taking part in this, so that people that without the usual means to buy their art but can buy their art. So it's a different type of buyer to what they're usually selling to.
I just love this. Kirstie, last year and in the previous years, we've seen enormous queues. There's so much interest in this. Why do you reckon that is? Why is this so appealing? And how does that tie into the reaction to art?
Well, I have to say that I absolutely love this as well. And, there are people who will gamble and say, look, perhaps 10% of these art pieces are going to be by a famous artist and it will be collectible and it will increase in its value. But what this really says is, and as the saying goes, many people will say, I don't know art, but I know what I like. And I think this puts this into the square of people thinking, what is going to make my heart sing? What do I love the look of? And if it turns out that it's by someone famous, well, that's a thrill. But I've always ended up winning because I bought something that I absolutely love. Yeah. So I think it's fantastic. Yeah. And I think, there are plenty of artists who are not well known and not famous who are extraordinary artists. And I'd probably say that there are some very well-known artists who, you'd have to wonder how they got to be so well-known.
Which ones do you want to
name?
I'm not saying.
Rachael, you're an artist. Is this something that you would consider entering?
Well, I'm not a visual artist, so if anything of mine went for $100, that would be unusual.
Performance art.
I'm a performing artist, I'm a dancer. This is so fantastic. It's going to have this democratising effect and people are going to pay for art and things like that. And that's a real barrier. A lot of people don't understand sometimes why art costs what it does. People don't take into account the cost of materials, which is very high, the time that the artist has put into that. So it is also about a culture of getting people to value art in a really beautiful way.
Well, and Warren, I just want to pick up on something that Kirstie said about some artists that she declined to name being perhaps not as good as the value. But this is something about the marketability of art, isn't it?
It's the beauty of art. Art, look, we all work and everything like that, but art and music and dance and performing arts, this is what life's about. I had this great experience where they asked me to open this primary school art show, and it was, and I walked through and I opened it and I saw this dingo painting, and it just hit me in the face, like you say, Kirstie. You just loved it, and I love it. And I read his story next to it. He would have been an 8 or 9 year old kid, and it said, I was walking home from school and I saw a dingo. And I just fell in love with it. But he was a smart kid too, because I turned around to him and I said, "This is your painting?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'd love to buy it. What do you want for it?" And he said, $50. And I went, "Okay, I got it." Yeah, I got it. And it's hanging in my hallway at home, and it's just brilliant. I just love it.
So my only I was thinking about this, and I like the story of a painting, and a lot of the art that I've bought, I've known the artist. And I think it's really important to support artists. It just struck me that if you depersonalise the artwork as a general thing, then it opens up to just AI art replacing artists, because if you devalue the name, then there is no cost to just having an automated image that moves your heart. So I think it's a great way of bringing people in, but I would hate to see names being off the artwork, or that this wasn't opening the door for the automation of creativity, which I think is a looming challenge for us.
And can I add to that, while this is a beautiful project and a beautiful, and it is a fundraiser,
Yeah,
for
that's
disabled
Yeah,
artists. I think that's really fantastic. Is that we can't expect people to go through their whole art buying experience only spending $100 and expecting that to be
It's only the size of a postcard.
Artwork,
priceless art. I should be able to get a Mombasa or anything like that for $100 or whatever I want to pay for it. So I think as a contained project and event, it is really wonderful. But I would agree that I don't think it's a model for art to be commodified
Well, and if it
like that.
sparks a bigger conversation, Kirstie.
And also, you know, it is very much about the story around the art. It's obviously what the art depicts, but the person who did it, why they painted it, and what they are trying to say. I mean, I am very spoiled. My partner is an artist, and I am lucky enough to have a lot of her art on our walls around our house, for example.
Is that one of your partner's artworks behind you?
That's right. My partner, Dee Greer Carly,
That is stunning, that artwork.
You know, she is visually minded in a way that I'm not, so I feel very lucky. But, you know, we're always going to have different kinds of buyers out there, and art, you know, there is an art market. There's lots of art that changes hand for nothing, you know, for just because someone said they like it and someone's thrilled as an artist that someone liked their work. But there will always be people that buy art for money's sake, for investment's sake, and then there will be people that buy it because they love it from their heart. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Hopefully you can get both in the one.
Yeah, and Rachel, just before we have to wrap tonight, a couple of years ago there were a whole lot of different musical performers, very renowned, who would set up busking, and the reaction that they had was so different to the paying hundreds, if not thousands, to go and see them. There's something here about the economy around art and creation, isn't there?
There is. There's a few things on YouTube and things like that, and on social media about this famous, artist was busking here and nobody noticed. And I don't love the binary that sets up between the professional art world. But whatever we can do to make art more accessible is fantastic. I teach arts at my university, Western Sydney, and the number one thing my students say to me who are going to be teachers is they say, I don't understand art. And my job is to open that door, as so many artists and educators do. So anything we can do to make it more accessible is fantastic.
I wonder if the point there is you don't have to understand it. It's about what you feel.
It's about what you feel.
Yeah. Look, before we go tonight, we'd like to pay tribute to a much respected drum panellist, Ewan Jones. The former LNP member for Herbert died this morning at the age of 63 following a long battle with cancer. He's being remembered by family, friends, as well as by colleagues as a man of principle who'd always stand up for his community, a man that's been described as having a big laugh and also a big heart. Ewan, you'll be greatly missed, and we send our thoughts to his family and certainly sending our love and thoughts this evening. And I just wanted to leave you with that you can watch 1+1 tonight, the second last episode of The Elders, as we've been talking to different elders right around the nation. That is all we have time for. Thank you to this incredible panel, Rachael Jacobs, Warren Mundine, Peter Lewis and Kirstie Parker. What a cracking conversation we've had across topics right throughout this evening. Do have an excellent evening. Julia Baird will be back with you tomorrow night. For now, though, good night.